The knocks came every night, always precisely at 3:33 a.m. It had become a haunting routine in my life, a terrifying ritual that I couldn't escape. The small town of Willowbrook, where I'd hoped to find peace, had become a place of dread. My new home, a charming cottage nestled amidst the tall oak trees, had been perfect when I first moved in. The real estate agent had assured me it was a peaceful neighborhood, and I believed him. But that was before the knocks began. The first night it happened, I was startled from my sleep by the sound of 3 distinct knocks on my front door. My heart raced, and I sat up in bed, trying to make sense of it. My eyes flicked to the digital clock on my bedside table. 3:33 a.m. The world outside was cloaked in darkness, and the wind whispered through the trees like a ghostly symphony. I hesitated for a moment, trying to convince myself it was just a prank, a joke from one of the local kids. But the knocks were too precise, too deliberate to be the work of a child. My curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed downstairs, my breath shallow and rapid. As I approached the front door, an icy dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I glanced through the peephole, expecting to see a mischievous grin or a group of teenagers. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There was no one there. The front porch was empty, bathed in the dim light from the street lamp. I pulled the door open, peering into the night, but there was nothing to be seen. The eerie silence of Willowbrook enveloped me, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. I retreated back to my bedroom, puzzled and unnerved. Perhaps it was a figment of my imagination, I thought. A combination of exhaustion and the unfamiliarity of my new surroundings playing tricks on my mind. The second night, the knocks came again. This time, I sprang from my bed with a sense of foreboding. The clock showed 3:33 a.m. once more, as if mocking me. I rushed downstairs, hoping to catch the prankster in the act. As before, the porch was empty, but the dread had intensified. I felt an unseen presence, an oppressive force that seemed to cling to the air like a malevolent fog. The knocks had a chilling rhythm, each one growing louder, demanding my attention. This time, I called out into the darkness, my voice trembling, "Who's there?" No answer, only the hollow echo of my own voice. The third night, I decided to investigate further. I armed myself with a flashlight and flung the door open at the sound of the knocks. The beam of light pierced the inky blackness, revealing nothing but the empty porch. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized there was no logical explanation for this eerie phenomenon. I contacted the local police, who assured me they would patrol the area during the early hours of the morning. They found no sign of anyone tampering with my property, but the knocks persisted. The fourth night, the knocks took on a more sinister tone. It was as if the entity behind them had grown impatient. It knocked louder, harder, as if it wanted to force its way inside. I could feel the house itself trembling with the impact. Terrified and desperate, I reached out to a local historian, hoping for answers. He shared stories of an ancient curse that had plagued Willowbrook for centuries. The curse spoke of a vengeful spirit, a malevolent entity seeking retribution for a long-forgotten sin. The historian warned me to engage with the entity, but it was too late. Each night, the knocks grew louder and more insistent, and I felt an inexorable pull, drawing me towards the door. The very walls of the house seemed to pulse with a dark, ancient energy. I couldn't bear it any longer. I decided to confront the entity head-on. On the fifth night, I stood before the door as the knocks reverberated through the house. The air was frigid, and I could see my breath as I whispered, "What do you want?" The knocks ceased, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a whisper, barely audible, filled the room.
"Revenge."
I gasped, feeling a chilling presence surround me. The house seemed to twist and contort, its very structure betraying the years of secrets it held. I realized that I had become entwined in the curse of Willowbrook, bound to this malevolent force by the mere act of living in this house. The entity's presence grew more tangible, an overwhelming darkness that enveloped me. It whispered stories of betrayal and tragedy, of a past that could never be erased. It sought to avenge the wrongs that had been done to it, wrongs that had transpired in the very place I now called home. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own house, unable to escape the relentless knocks and the relentless entity. It had become clear that I was merely a vessel, a pawn in the entity's quest for vengeance. The entity's whispers grew louder and more insistent, filling the house with a haunting cacophony of voices, each one recounting a different tale of suffering. It told of a time long ago, when Willowbrook was a thriving town, and my house had been at the center of it all. As the curse's stories unfolded, I learned of a dark secret that had been buried deep within the town's history. It was a tale of greed, betrayal, and an unspeakable atrocity that had occurred in my very home. The malevolent entity had once been a resident of Willowbrook, an innocent soul wronged by those who should have protected it. The curse spoke of a corrupt mayor, a man who had used his position to further his own selfish ambitions, regardless of the harm it caused to the townspeople. This mayor had plotted to seize the land my house stood on, intending to build a grand mansion to flaunt his wealth and power. In the process, the mayor had ordered the destruction of the entity's home, a humble cottage that had stood 4 generations. As the cottage crumbled under the force of wrecking crews, the entity's cries for mercy went unheard. It was a tragedy that should have never occurred, a sin that had festered over the centuries. The curse had endured, passed down through the generations, seeking retribution for the terrible injustice inflicted upon the entity. I was now privy to this long-buried history, and it filled me with a profound sense of guilt. I had become an unwitting resident of a house built upon a foundation of suffering, and I had no choice but to bear witness to the entity's relentless pursuit of revenge. Each night, as the clock struck 3:33 a.m., I would stand before the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The entity's presence was a suffocating darkness that enveloped me, and its whispers were a cacophony of torment. It was as if the very walls of my house had absorbed the malevolence of the curse, and I was trapped in a nightmarish cycle of retribution. The entity's stories grew more horrifying with each passing night, revealing the depths of the injustice that had been done to it. It recounted the suffering it had endured as its home was torn apart, and the pain of being cast out of Willowbrook, forever condemned to wander in the shadows. I was desperate to find a way to break free from the curse's grip, to release both the entity and myself from this relentless torment. I consulted every resource available, seeking answers in ancient texts, folklore, and the town's historical records. But it seemed that the curse was as unyielding as the entity itself. The curse had ensnared me, and it was clear that I was an integral part of its relentless quest for vengeance. The entity had found a way to channel its pain and anger through me, making me an unwilling conduit for its malevolence. As the nights turned into weeks and then months, I became a mere shell of my former self. I was plagued by the entity's stories and the guilt of living in a house that had caused so much suffering. My sleep-deprived eyes were haunted, and I could feel the curse's influence seeping into every corner of my life. The once charming town of Willowbrook had transformed into a desolate, eerie place, shrouded in an unsettling atmosphere. The townspeople sensed the darkness that had taken hold, and they avoided my house as if it were a cursed place. I reached out to the local historian once more, desperate for a solution. He suggested a ritual, an ancient ceremony that could potentially appease the curse and release the entity from its torment. It was a risky endeavor, and the historian warned that it might not work, but I had no other choice. The night of the ritual arrived, and the historian, along with a group of townspeople, gathered outside my house. Together, we followed the intricate steps of the ceremony, lighting candles and chanting incantations that were meant to pacify the malevolent force. As the ritual reached its climax, the air grew thick with tension, and the very ground beneath us seemed to tremble. The entity's presence, once suffocating, began to wane. It fought against the ritual's power, its whispers growing fainter and more desperate. Finally, with a burst of otherworldly light, the entity was torn from my house, released from the curse that had bound it for centuries. Its cries of agony echoed through the night, and I could feel its anguish as it departed, leaving me free from its torment. The curse had been broken, and Willowbrook would finally be at peace. My house, once a place of dread, was now just a house, devoid of the malevolent force that had plagued it for so long. I could finally sleep soundly, knowing that the entity had found its release, and that the town could heal. But the memories of those relentless nights at 3:33 a.m. would never truly leave me. I had witnessed the horrors of the past, and I knew that some secrets were better left buried, for the price of uncovering them could be far too steep.